under rebel control.
If it was deliberate, the attack on the oil refinery depot in Ras Lanuf shows a worrying trend and escalation, and is bringing home the fears of many people here that Gaddafi will unleash his air force and destroy the oil and gas installations in the area. Fortunately, this was only an oil storage depot, but if it was the gas installation complex, which is not far away, then it would be far worse scenario. Thousands of people would be killed when toxic gases would be released into the air. So it's a very, very worrying time for people here. But it's showing also that the front lines here are very fluid. We understand from the government sources that they're claiming they've taken the Bin Jawad area back. The opposition forces say they still have it. It's very confusing to get an accurate handle on what is going on, but there is confusion, but there is also ultimate determination from the opposition forces. They're still massing no matter what. They are intent on going down that road and progressing as far as possible, and even if that means their death, they're very committed to this situation. We tend to think that maybe things are going on behind the scenes. There may be talks going on in secret to try and get a peaceful solution, because we haven't yet seen Gaddafi unleash the full might of his force. We know that 200 kilometers away in Sirte, his stronghold, there's high-tech weaponry and there are 4,000 well-trained men. He hasn't used them yet. We're seeing every single day the Air Force in action dropping 2 or 3 bombs, but largely these are missing their targets. So we're asking the question, are the pilots deliberately doing that, or are they just sending a warning signal? We don't know. It's a very confusing situation. It seems to become more confused by the day.
Well, Libyan oil production is down to about 500,000 barrels a day. That's less than 1/3 of the usual output. The country's top oil official says despite the destruction near Ras Lanuf, the infrastructure remains largely intact.
Luckily, of course, the installation, nothing of sabotage has been happened. Only today, one of the small tanks in Sidra, which is small diesel tank of 200 barrel about, that caught fire. But otherwise, the integrity of the oil installations is maintained.
Well, senior representatives from Muammar al-Gaddafi's government have been deployed in an apparent diplomatic blitz. The first plane took off from Tripoli and landed in Cairo. Sources are telling us talks will take place there with the Arab League. Well, a second plane left Tripoli and stopped briefly in Malta, but it then proceeded to Lisbon. That's where Portugal's foreign minister has held an informal meeting with Gaddafi's envoy. Well, the third plane briefly stopped in Paris, but then headed over to Brussels. Our sources understand talks could be held with the EU and NATO. Well, AlJazeera's Alan Fisher is in Brussels.
The takeoff of the 3 planes was first reported on Twitter. That sent everyone scrambling to find out who was on board and where they were going. It's now become clear that one touched down in Cairo, one went on to Portugal so that the person on board that flight can have discussions with the Portuguese foreign minister, and a third flight, we're told, went to Paris and then on to Brussels. Certainly the suggestion that has been made is that these talks with the Libyans were suggested in the first instance by the White House. So why Brussels? Well, over the next 48 hours, there are 2 very important meetings going to get underway here. First of all, on Thursday, we have NATO, the world's strongest military alliance. Libya was always going to be top of the agenda. We're hearing from NATO that a number of scenarios have been played out, essentially. They're putting things in place to allow the political decision to be made on what they do next with Libya. And of course, a no-fly zone is something that a number of countries have been pushing for. And then there is a meeting of EU leaders on Friday as well. What we're likely to see there are the sanctions that have been imposed by a number of countries against the Gaddafi regime be extended right across Europe. So such as the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which owns shares in a number of companies across Europe, owns properties across Europe, runs bank accounts for the Gaddafi family. All of those will be frozen. So we're seeing Muammar Gaddafi claiming substantial victories militarily in Libya at the moment, but also it now looks as if there's a diplomatic offensive underway to speak to the African Union, the EU and NATO. What will develop will become clear, hopefully, within the next 48 hours. But it certainly is a very interesting development, and Brussels here, right at the heart of what's going to happen.
Well, the French President Nicolas Sarkozy will meet envoys of Libya's opposition National Council on Thursday. The statement from Sarkozy's office says they'll discuss the general situation in Libya, in particular humanitarian conditions. Europe's top foreign policy chief is calling on the world to turn its back on Muammar al-Gaddafi. Catherine Ashton says it's time to send him back into the cold. Barnaby Phillips has the details.
A no-fly zone over Libya's skies, enforced above all by America's military might. It sounds simple: fighter jets, monitoring or AWACS aircraft, and electronic surveillance to stop the Libyan Air Force from bombing rebel forces or civilians. In practice, it may not be so simple.
An abstract no-fly zone, when you're just simply not allowing military aircraft to not pass through, that doesn't actually help prevent bloodshed on the ground. So a no-fly zone without it being coupled by military strikes is quite futile.
Information on Libya's air defences is hard to come by, but according to recent research by one analyst, there are some 30 surface-to-air missile sites, most on the heavily populated coast. So how do you hit them without risking civilian casualties? And what about the history of these operations? During the First Gulf War, a no-fly zone was created in northern Iraq. Later, it was extended to the south. It helped protect Kurdish and Shia populations from Saddam Hussein's air force. Then a no-fly zone was established in Bosnia. It restricted Serbian forces, but didn't prevent the killing of 8,000 people in the Srebrenica massacre. There are political as well as practical problems. At the UN, Russia and China are wary of deeper involvement, whilst after the fiasco of the Iraq War, some Western military planners are cautious.
NATO is definitely not looking to intervene in Libya. We have asked our military to conduct necessary planning to be prepared for all eventualities, but we have not taken any operational decision.
Western countries will want to know how much support there is for a no-fly zone in the Arab world, and defence chiefs will be warning that even a supposedly limited operation can have unpredictable consequences. Barnaby Phillips, Al Jazeera.
Well, US President Barack Obama's national security team met on Wednesday to discuss that crisis in Libya. Let's go over to Jane Dutton in our Washington Broadcast Center to find out what they've been up to there. Jane.
Thank you, Sammy. Well, the White House spokesman, Jay Carney, indicated that the U.S. is open to the possibility of arming Libyan rebels. As the violence escalates on the ground, Obama is under pressure to decide whether the U.S. should intervene and whether that intervention would be in line with his stated goals for the region. Rosalind Jordan reports.
Barack Obama has never issued what one might call a doctrine for his foreign policy. But he did say this soon after becoming president.
Rules must be binding. Violations must be punished. Words must mean something.
In the case of Libya, with almost